He walked into his son-in-law's house and was shocked to see his daughter kneeling and cleaning the floor while crying. What he did next surprised everyone. Edward was a man known for his physical strength as well as his strength of character. Born and raised in a small village in the countryside, he had spent most of his life dedicating himself to hard work and family. From a young age, Edward had learned the value of hard work, growing up alongside his father in the cornfields that surrounded the village. His dedication and work ethic made him a respected figure in the community, someone everyone turned to in times of need. Edward's life, however, had not been without challenges. Many years ago, he met Linda, a young woman full of life, with bright eyes and a smile that lit up any room. The love between them blossomed quickly, and soon they were married, building a small house together in the village. It was a simple home, but full of love. Linda gave birth to Laura, a girl who from an early age inherited her mother's sweetness and joy, becoming the light of Edward's eyes. However, the happiness they had built was interrupted when Linda became seriously ill. Edward did everything to save her, taking her to the best doctors his resources could afford, but the illness was relentless. Linda passed away, leaving a huge void in Edward's life and in Laura's, who was still too young to fully understand the loss. Since then, Edward has devoted himself entirely to raising his daughter, promising himself that he would do anything to protect her and provide her with the best life possible. As the years passed, Laura grew into a charming young woman, heir to her mother's beauty and generous spirit. Edward was proud to see her become a strong and decisive woman, and at the same time, a part of his heart tightened when he realized that she would not be his girl forever. He knew that one day Laura would find someone she wanted to share her life with, and he only hoped that someone would be worthy of his daughter. It was then that Daniel appeared in Laura's life. He was a man who, at first glance, seemed to be everything Edward could wish for his daughter. Daniel was polite, hard-working, and always treated Laura with respect and affection. He quickly won Edward's trust and Laura's heart. They started dating, and before long, their relationship became serious. Edward, still a little apprehensive like any father, found no reason to suspect Daniel's intentions. The wedding was a simple event, but full of emotion. The entire village community gathered to celebrate Laura and Daniel's union. Edward, though he felt a mixture of pride and melancholy as he watched his daughter marry, was happy for her. He believed that Daniel would take good care of Laura, that he would be the man who would make her happy and protect her, as he had always done. For the first few months, everything seemed perfect. Laura was happy in her new home, and Edward saw her smile as a confirmation that he had made the right choice in supporting the marriage. However, as time went by, Edward began to notice small changes in his daughter's behavior. She was more reserved, her usual brightness seemed dimmed, but whenever he asked if everything was okay, Laura assured her that it was, attributing her apparent sadness to fatigue and adjusting to her new married life. Edward, even though not completely convinced, respected his daughter's space, believing that she would know how to deal with the challenges of her marriage. However, in his heart, a restlessness began to grow, a sense that something was wrong. He wasn't sure what it was, but he decided he needed to be more attentive, more present. So it was that, on a seemingly ordinary day, he decided to visit Laura unannounced, just to see how she was. When he arrived at his daughter's house, Edward felt an inexplicable chill as he opened the door. What he found upon entering would forever change his view of Daniel and his role in Laura's life. Edward entered Laura's house with silent footsteps, his heart beating faster than usual. The house was eerily quiet, without the usual sound of her daughter singing as she took care of household chores. He felt a chill down his spine, a sensation he couldn't explain. As he approached the kitchen, an unexpected scene made his heart almost stop. Laura was kneeling on the kitchen floor, a cleaning cloth in hand, vigorously scrubbing the already clean floor, while tears streamed down her face. It was a sight Edward had never imagined he would see. His daughter, his precious Laura, was visibly devastated, and the simple act of seeing her in that state made her blood boil and her heart fill with deep pain. "Laura?" Edward called, his voice full of concern. Laura looked up at her father, and the expression on his face broke Edward's heart even more. She tried to smile, but it was a sad smile, full of pain and resignation. He didn't need another word to know that something terrible had happened. With a swift movement, he knelt beside her and wrapped her in a tight embrace, feeling his daughter's frail body tremble against his. "My daughter, what happened?" Edward asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though he already felt the anger and worry building inside him. Laura remained silent for a few seconds, the sobs making it difficult to speak. But when he finally calmed down enough to answer, her voice was just a whisper, "Daddy. I didn't want you to see me like that." Edward pulled back slightly to get a better look at his daughter, and it was then that he saw the purple spot on her face, near her left eye. It was a clear, unmistakable mark, the result of a coup. Shock and disbelief ran through Edward's body like an electric current. He clenched his fists tightly, trying to contain the fury that threatened to erupt. "Laura, who did this to you?" he asked, his voice now deep and trembling, barely recognizing himself. Laura lowered her head, tears falling silently on the cleaning cloth she still held. "It was Daniel," she mumbled, barely able to pronounce her husband's name. Edward felt as if the ground had opened up under his feet. Daniel, the man he trusted, the man he believed was worthy of his daughter, had raised his hand against her. Fury and the desire to protect Laura mixed within him, creating a storm of emotions that he struggled to control. "Did he do that to you?" Edward repeated it, more like a statement than a question. Laura nodded, confirming the worst. "Why? What happened, my daughter? Tell me everything." Laura took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "It was all because of a fight. He wanted to go out drinking with friends, as he always does, but I asked him to stay home today. I just wanted us to spend time together. He's been hanging out so much lately, and I feel so alone." Edward listened to her in silence, his anger growing with every word. Laura continued, "I insisted. She said she was worried, that he drank too much and that it was changing who he was. He didn't like what I said. He was furious, started yelling at me, saying that I had no right to boss him around. I tried to defend myself, but he pushed me against the wall and then he beat me." Laura's words echoed in Edward's mind like thunder. He felt a lump in his throat, a mixture of pain and indignation that almost suffocated him. He knew that Daniel had a strong temper, but he never imagined that he could get to this point, that he could hurt anyone, especially Laura. "After he hit me, I fell to the ground. He looked at me with so much hatred, Dad. I've never seen Daniel like this before. And then, without saying anything, he left the house. I heard him slam the door and then the silence. I stayed here, not knowing what to do. I was only able to start cleaning, because I didn't want you to see the house like that. I didn't want you to know." Edward felt the tears in his eyes, but held them back. He knew he needed to be strong for Laura. He hugged her again, this time tighter, trying to pass on all the love and protection he had always sworn to give her. "Laura, my daughter, you don't have to be afraid. I'm here, and I'll never let anything bad happen to you. This man, this monster. He will no longer touch you. I promise." He kissed Laura's forehead, feeling her cold skin under his lips. After a long moment, Edward pulled away and looked into his daughter's eyes. "Where is Daniel now?" Laura, still with a trembling voice, replied, "He went to the bar, the one he always goes to with his friends." Edward stood up, helping Laura to her feet as well. "Stay here, my daughter. I'll be back soon." He took the hat he had left in the entrance and, without saying anything else, left the house with determined steps. The fury in his heart burned like an uncontrollable flame, and he knew he would not rest until he had settled the score with Daniel. Edward walked out of the house with quick, determined steps, his heart pounding in his chest as his thoughts ran over each other in a torrent of anger and worry. He walked through the village streets, which now seemed longer and emptier than ever, with each step propelled by the image of Laura, kneeling on the ground, bruised and crying. The mere thought of Daniel raising his hand against his daughter made Edward's blood boil in such a way that he felt the anger vibrate in his muscles, ready to explode. The bar where Daniel used to go was a few blocks away. It was a small place, with wide doors and dim lighting, where the men of the region gathered after a day's work to drink and talk. To Edward, that place had never meant anything more than a distraction for tired men, but now, it was the place where he would face the man who dared to hurt his daughter. As he approached the bar, Edward could hear the laughter and voices coming from inside. It was a sound that, on any other day, he would have ignored, but now, it sounded like an insult. He pushed the wooden doors hard, entering the bar with the grim expression that immediately silenced those closest to the entrance. He looked around until his eyes found Daniel, sitting at a table in the corner, with a glass of drink in his hand and a smile on his face, seemingly oblivious to what was about to happen. Wasting no time, Edward marched directly to the table where Daniel stood. The young man looked up when he noticed Edward approaching and, still not realizing the seriousness of his father-in-law's expression, joked, "Do you need anything, father-in-law?" That was the last thing Daniel said before he was hit by a strong punch in the face, which threw him to the ground, knocking over the glass he was holding and silencing the entire bar. Daniel, surprised and stunned, tried to get up, still not fully understanding what was happening. "But what?" he muttered, as he brought his hand to his face, where Edward's blow had landed. Edward said nothing. Instead, she grabbed Daniel by the shirt and pulled him up, hitting him again, this time in the stomach, causing the air to flee the young man's lungs in a groan of pain. The whole bar watched in silence, no one daring to intervene. Only Daniel's friend, a man of average height, stood up from the next table, looking ready to join the fray. "Don't get involved in that. This is between me and him," Edward said in a firm voice, looking at Daniel's friend with an expression that left no doubt that he was serious. Even so, the man moved forward, trying to grab Edward by the arm, but was easily knocked down with a single push. With the way clear, Edward turned his attention to Daniel, who was recovering from the second blow but still looked stunned. He grabbed the young man by the shoulders and forced him against the wall, hitting him hard as he screamed, his voice charged with uncontrollable fury. "How dare you raise your hand against my daughter?" Edward screamed, his voice echoing in the silence of the bar. "She's all I have, and you had the courage to hurt her. Do you think you're going to get away with this?" With each word, Edward hit Daniel against the wall, the impact of the blows leaving the young man even more stunned and unresponsive. Fear began to seep into Daniel's eyes, replacing the confident smile he had displayed minutes earlier. "If you touch her again, if you even think about hurting her again, I swear there will be no place in the world where you can hide from me," Edward continued, now through gritted teeth, his voice filled with palpable menace. He hit Daniel once again, this time in the stomach, causing him to double in pain, before releasing him and letting him fall to the ground. The scene was cut short when the bar owners, finally recovering from the shock, rushed to intervene. They separated the two men, pushing Edward back as they helped Daniel up. "That's gone too far," one of the owners shouted, while the other customers watched silently, some nodding in agreement. One of the owners of the bar, realizing the seriousness of the situation and Daniel's condition, quickly picked up the phone and called the police. "This is not going to end here," he said, as he made the call. Daniel, now standing, still panting and clearly frightened, looked at Edward with a mixture of fear and hatred, but said nothing. He knew that any word could unleash his father-in-law's wrath again. The next few minutes seemed like an eternity, with the bar plunged into tense silence. Edward stood still, breathing deeply, trying to control the anger that was still bubbling inside him. He knew the police were on their way, but he didn't care. For him, what mattered was that Daniel understood that he could never hurt Laura again without facing serious consequences. When the police arrived at the bar, the tension in the air was palpable. Edward and Daniel were on opposite sides of the bar, both marked by the fight, but for very different reasons. Daniel, still panting and clearly frightened, kept his head down, while Edward, still gripped by anger, struggled to control his emotions. The police quickly assessed the situation, realizing that this was more than just a bar mess. The officers separated those involved, handcuffing both Edward and Daniel and the friend who had tried to intervene. The voices in the bar quieted as the scene unfolded, with patrons watching in silence as the three men were escorted out and loaded into patrol cars. Edward offered no resistance. He knew his actions would have consequences, but for him, protecting his daughter would always be a priority. When they arrived at the police station, the three were taken to separate rooms for questioning. As Edward waited, sitting in an uncomfortable chair, his mind was still focused on Laura. He knew that she would be called to clarify the facts, and this caused him a mixture of concern and relief. Worry for knowing that she would have to relive the pain, but relief for knowing that the truth would finally come out. Some time later, Laura was brought to the police station. His eyes swollen from crying, but his posture showed a new determination. She knew it was time to tell everything, to expose what had been happening since Daniel began to change. During the interrogation, Laura spoke in a trembling but firm voice. She told about the beginning of the marriage, which seemed so promising, and how things began to fall apart over time. He started drinking more and more, and he got aggressive when I tried to talk about it, she explained, her voice cracking as she recalled the tense moments. Yesterday, I asked him not to leave, so we could spend time together. But he got furious, started screaming, and then pushed me against the wall. When I tried to defend myself, he hit me in the face. The pain was visible in her words, but there was also a relief in finally talking about what she was enduring in silence. Laura went on, describing how Daniel had left her alone, hurt and terrified, and how all she could do was start cleaning, trying to find some sense of control in the chaos. As Laura spoke, Edward was in another room, awaiting his own interrogation. He knew he had acted impulsively, but he didn't regret standing up for his daughter. When he was finally called, he recounted the events at the bar, explaining his anger and the reason that led him to confront Daniel so violently. Daniel, in turn, tried to justify his actions, but his words rang hollow in the face of the evidence and Laura's testimony. Daniel's friend, who had tried to intervene in the fight, was released after giving a statement, as his participation was minimal. After hours of questioning and putting all the pieces of the story together, the officers allowed Laura to post her father's bail, so that he could be released while the case continued to be investigated. Daniel, in turn, faced more serious charges due to the assault against Laura. When Edward was released, he found Laura waiting for him at the entrance of the police station. She ran to him, hugging him tight, feeling safe at last. "Daddy, I can't live like this anymore," she said, her voice decided. "I'm going to ask for a divorce. I don't want to be afraid anymore. I want to start over, but I need you by my side." Edward, still shaken but filled with pride in his daughter's courage, replied firmly, "I am here for you, I always will be. Let's get through this together." After leaving the police station, Laura and Edward returned to the house where she had grown up, a place that had always represented safety and love. For Laura, returning to her father's home was like finding firm ground under her feet again, after so long living in a storm. She felt relieved that she no longer had to worry about Daniel, who, out of fear of Edward and by order of the police, had moved to another, distant city, where he could no longer threaten her. With the divorce finalized, the house where Laura and Daniel lived was sold, and the amount was divided between the two. Laura used her share to start over. She invested in small projects she had always dreamed of, something that gave her not only a new source of income, but also a renewed purpose. In the village, with Edward's unconditional support, she felt safe and confident, knowing that the worst was behind her. Life began to take on a new rhythm, calmer and more stable, where Laura could finally breathe a sigh of relief. His father's presence was a constant reminder that, despite the hardships, the family's love and strength were indestructible. Over time, the wounds began to heal, and Edward's home returned to being a place of laughter and joy, where father and daughter rebuilt their lives together, ready to face any challenge the future might bring. And so, Laura moved on, knowing that no matter what happened, she would always have a place to call home and a father who would protect her with all his strength and love. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.